My name is Emily Carter, and I never thought the first betrayal I would uncover in my own family would come at the expense of someone who couldn't defend themselves, my golden retriever, Max. I loved him more than anything, but when he suddenly died, my father dismissed it as just old age. The truth, revealed by the vet's autopsy, showed something much darker, something my stepmother desperately tried to hide. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. It's strange how family can shift overnight. One day, you're safe, held in a rhythm of routine and trust, and the next, you're staring into a silence so heavy it feels like betrayal itself is sitting at the dinner table with you. I was 17 when everything happened, living in a small suburban town in Oregon with my dad, my stepmother Claire, and Max. My mom had passed away when I was 8, and while I never stopped missing her, Max had been my anchor through the storms. He was my shadow, my comfort, and the one soul I could always rely on. When my dad remarried Claire 2 years earlier, I tried to be open-minded. She was polished in a way my mom never had been. Expensive clothes, immaculate makeup even when she went to the grocery store, and a tone of voice that always carried a subtle edge, like every word was measured to remind you she was the smartest person in the room. She never outright said she didn't like Max, but I could see it in the way she avoided petting him, or how she cringed whenever his fur brushed against the couch she kept spotless. Dad would laugh it off, saying she just wasn't a dog person. But to me, Max wasn't just a dog, he was family. The night before it all began, I remember lying on the living room carpet with Max, scratching behind his ears as he sighed contentedly. He had always been so full of life, bounding toward the door whenever I came home from school, tail wagging like a metronome of joy. That evening, though, he seemed tired. His eyes drooped more than usual, and when I offered him one of his favorite treats, he sniffed it but turned his head away. "Maybe he's just not hungry," Dad said when I mentioned it, dismissive as ever. Claire simply raised her eyebrows in that way she did, a half smile tugging at her lips that always made me feel like she knew something I didn't. The next morning, Max wouldn't get up. His breathing was shallow, his paws twitching like he was trying to run in his sleep but couldn't. I panicked, shaking him gently, calling his name over and over. By the time we got him to the vet, his heartbeat was faint, and just an hour later, he was gone. My world collapsed. Tears blurred everything, and I could barely hear the vet's soft condolences. Dad's arm went around my shoulders, stiff, uncomfortable, like he was just doing what he thought he should. "He was old, Em," he said firmly, as though saying it with conviction would somehow erase my grief. "These things happen. It's nature." But something gnawed at me. Max wasn't that old. 7 years wasn't old age for a golden retriever. And more than that, he'd been fine until recently, healthy, playful, eating well. The sudden decline didn't make sense. As I sat in the car with the scent of antiseptic still clinging to my clothes, Claire spoke up for the first time. "Maybe this is for the best," she said quietly, her voice smooth as silk but with a trace of something sharper beneath it. "Now you can focus on your future without distractions." A distraction. That's what she thought Max was. The words burned into my mind, leaving me both heartbroken and suspicious. I stared out the window the whole drive home, silent tears streaming down my face, replaying every recent moment in my head. Max's sudden refusal of food, his tired eyes, Claire's disdainful glances whenever he entered the room, and the way she always seemed to take over the kitchen, even insisting that she prepare Max's meals when I wasn't around. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house was too quiet without Max's soft breathing at the foot of my bed. I thought about my dad's words about nature, but it didn't feel right. Something inside me, an instinct I couldn't ignore, kept whispering that this wasn't natural at all. I remembered the way she had smiled faintly when Dad said it was old age, how quickly she moved on, pouring herself a glass of wine and turning on the television like the loss didn't matter. The next day, still hollow with grief, but now fueled with a gnawing suspicion, I called the vet back. My voice trembled as I asked if they could do an autopsy. The receptionist hesitated. Most families didn't request that for pets, but when she heard the strain in my voice, she agreed to speak to the doctor. I didn't tell Dad. I knew he would say it was a waste of time and that I was just clinging to something because I couldn't accept the truth. And Claire, I didn't even want to imagine her reaction. This was something I had to do on my own. For the next few days, I lived in limbo, pretending to go about normal life while my mind was consumed with waiting. Every glance from Claire felt loaded, like she could sense I was keeping something from her. And every night, I cried into Max's empty collar, gripping it like a lifeline. When the call finally came, my stomach dropped at the vet's first words. "Emily, we found something unusual." The results were clear. Max hadn't died of natural causes. He had been poisoned. When the vet uttered those words, "he had been poisoned," I froze, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. My heart pounded against my ribs, and I asked the vet to repeat it, hoping I had misunderstood, hoping my grief had twisted his words into something far darker than they were. But no, he was steady, professional, and painfully clear. The toxicology showed traces of rat poison in Max's system, enough to cause organ failure. This wasn't some slow, age-related decline. Someone had deliberately given it to him. I thanked the vet in a voice I barely recognized, hanging up with a trembling hand. My chest burned as though all the air had been sucked out of the room. Poison. That wasn't just cruel, it was malicious. And I couldn't shake the gnawing thought of who had the motive and the opportunity. I spent the next few hours locked in my room, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything. I thought of how Claire always insisted on helping when I fed Max, even though I had been doing it since I was a child. I thought of her little sighs of annoyance whenever he barked at the mailman, or how she would spray down the couch if even a single strand of his golden fur clung to it. She hated mess, hated noise, hated anything that drew attention away from herself. Max had been all of those things to her, messy, noisy, and endlessly adored by me. But then I thought of Dad, who believed in simple explanations. He never wanted to stir up trouble, never wanted to believe that anyone close to him could be capable of malice. If I told him, he would dismiss me like he always did when Claire and I butted heads. "Don't be dramatic, Emily. She's trying." Those words had become his refrain over the past 2 years, as though I were the problem, the unreasonable one who couldn't let go of my grief and accept change. How could I tell him now that his wife was capable of killing my best friend? Dinner that night was unbearable. The chair where Max usually sat at my side, nudging me for scraps under the table, was painfully empty. I picked at my food, the taste gone from my mouth. Dad tried to lighten the mood with small talk about school and college applications, but his words floated over me like static. Claire, on the other hand, was glowing, her hair shining under the kitchen lights, her lipstick perfectly applied as if she had been preparing for some unspoken performance. She smiled too much, poured herself another glass of wine, and spoke about redecorating the living room. Her voice was smooth, but to me, every syllable dripped with hidden venom. "Emily, you're quiet," Dad said, glancing between me and Claire. "You okay?" I nodded quickly, my throat tight, unable to say what I really wanted to. How could I? I didn't have proof in my hands yet, just a report at the vet's office, and my gut screaming at me. Claire's eyes flicked toward me, sharp and calculating, and for the briefest moment I thought I saw satisfaction there, like she knew exactly what I knew, but dared me to say it out loud. But where could I turn? My dad wouldn't listen, and I couldn't go to the police with nothing but suspicion. I needed evidence, proof that would make even Dad's denial crumble. That was when I remembered the vet's words again. The autopsy. There was a report, a document with cold, clinical facts that couldn't be brushed aside as teenage hysteria. The next morning, I skipped first period and walked straight to the veterinary clinic. The receptionist recognized me instantly, her expression softening with sympathy. "Emily," she said gently, "I'm so sorry again about Max." I swallowed hard and asked if I could have a copy of the autopsy report. She hesitated, then disappeared into the back, returning with a stapled packet. My hands shook as I took it, tucking it into my backpack like it was contraband. As I walked out, the weight of it pressed against me. This was no longer just my suspicion. This was fact. Someone had poisoned Max. And now I needed to find out who and why. But even as I stepped onto the sidewalk, I felt eyes on me. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see Claire's silver SUV idling nearby. There was nothing, just the quiet hum of traffic. Still, the feeling lingered. Claire wasn't stupid. She was perceptive, always watching. If she suspected I was digging, she'd be ready. And that scared me more than anything else. At home that evening, Claire smiled as she served dinner, sliding a plate in front of me with her manicured hands. "Eat up, Emily," she said sweetly, her voice laced with a false kindness that made my stomach twist. "You need your strength." I stared at the food, my appetite gone, my mind buzzing with the weight of the report hidden in my bag upstairs. Something told me the worst was yet to come. The night I finally reached my breaking point wasn't marked by anything dramatic at first. It was a Tuesday, a school night, and the house smelled faintly of lemon cleaner, the way it always did after Claire had one of her obsessive scrubbing sprees. I had been holed up in my room for most of the evening, staring at the vet's report, reading and rereading the words until they blurred together. Ingestion of anticoagulant rodenticide, hemorrhaging, acute poisoning. They were cold, clinical terms, but I couldn't shake the image of Max lying helpless on the floor, his body failing from something he never should have had inside him. I knew I couldn't stay silent any longer. Yet I also knew the risk. If I confronted Dad, if I pushed too hard, it might drive a wedge between us that could never be repaired. Still, I couldn't unlearn the truth. I carried the report with me everywhere, tucked between textbooks in my backpack like a secret I couldn't dare to let out of my sight. Each day, I went through the motions at school, but in the back of my mind, I felt the tension building. Claire had started watching me more closely, her questions laced with sugar, but her eyes sharp. "How is your day, sweetheart? You're looking pale. Are you sure you're taking care of yourself?" She'd linger in doorways, listening more than speaking, as though she knew something was shifting but hadn't figured out what. It was suffocating, like living with a predator disguised in pearls. The breaking point came one evening when Dad announced, almost casually, that Claire had arranged for the living room furniture to be replaced. "Something more modern," he said with a smile, clearly repeating her words. I froze mid-bite. The couch, Max's favorite spot, where he would curl up beside me during movie nights, was to be discarded like trash. "But that's our couch," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's fine, the way it is." Dad chuckled, shaking his head. It's just a couch. Claire's right. It's time for something new." Claire's smile widened, and she tilted her head toward me. "Besides, Emily, it's full of dog hair. No matter how much I clean, I can't get rid of the smell. Don't you think it's better to start fresh?" Her tone was sweet, but I felt the venom beneath it. It wasn't just about the couch. It was about erasing Max, scrubbing him from the house like he had never existed. My chest tightened, and before I could stop myself, I blurted, "He doesn't smell. You're just glad he's gone." The room fell into silence. Dad's fork clattered against his plate as he looked at me, startled. Claire's face froze for a fraction of a second, her eyes flashing with something dark, before she rearranged her features into a mask of hurt innocence. "Emily," she said softly, almost whispering, "how could you say something like that?" I felt my face burn, tears stinging my eyes, but the words kept pouring out. "You never liked him. You always complained about him, and now he's dead, and you just want to replace everything he touched. You hated him." My voice cracked and my hands shook as I gripped the edge of the table. "Emily." Dad's voice was sharp, commanding in a way I rarely heard. He looked furious, but not at Claire, at me. "I know you're upset, but this isn't fair. Max died of natural causes. We've been over this." The report in my backpack suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds.
My throat tightened, and I almost pulled it out right then and there, slammed it on the table, and forced him to read it. But fear held me back. Fear of what it would do to him, fear that even with undeniable proof, he'd find a way to dismiss it, to side with Claire. So instead, I bit my tongue, tears spilling over as I stood up and pushed back from the table. "You don't understand," I whispered, and without waiting for his response, I ran upstairs to my room, slamming the door shut behind me. I collapsed onto my bed, shaking, sobs racking my chest. My dad's refusal to see the truth felt like a second betrayal. It wasn't just Claire I was fighting, it was his blindness, his unwillingness to question the woman he loved. For the first time, I felt utterly alone, trapped in a house where the truth was poison itself. That night, as the house grew quiet, I stared at the ceiling, listening to the faint murmur of Claire's voice drifting up from the living room. She was speaking low, soothing, probably convincing Dad that I was just grieving, unstable, lashing out. And maybe she was right about one thing. I was grieving, but I wasn't unstable. I knew what I knew. Max had been poisoned, and Claire was the only one who stood to gain from his absence. The breaking point wasn't just my outburst at dinner, it was what it left behind in its wake. A decision. I couldn't sit in silence anymore, couldn't let Dad's denial bury the truth along with Max. If I didn't fight for him, no one would. But to fight, I needed allies. Proof wasn't enough if it stayed in my backpack. I had to find someone who would listen, someone who could see what my father refused to see. The morning after I finally confided in Jordan, I felt different walking through the school halls. For weeks, I had been drowning in grief and suspicion, trapped in silence with no one to believe me. But now, at least one person knew the truth. Jordan's outrage had lit something inside me, an ember of courage that refused to be extinguished. Still, courage alone wouldn't be enough. I knew Claire was clever, manipulative, and practiced in disguising herself as the perfect wife. If I wanted to expose her, I would need more than my gut and the vet's report. I needed outside eyes, someone who would see past Claire's performance, someone who couldn't be easily dismissed. That afternoon, Jordan cornered me by my locker. "I've been thinking about this all night," she said, lowering her voice. "You can't keep this between just us. You need someone who can actually do something with it. What about showing the vet's report to an adult you trust?" My stomach tightened. Adults had never really been safe territory for me, not since Dad started acting like my feelings were inconveniences. But Jordan was right. I couldn't take this on alone. After school, instead of heading straight home, I walked to the veterinary clinic again. The autumn air was sharp against my skin, and I gripped the straps of my backpack like they were lifelines. Inside, the receptionist gave me a sympathetic smile. "Emily, back again?" she asked gently. I nodded, my throat dry. I need to talk to Dr. Simmons, please." She gave me a look filled with pity and concern, but led me back to one of the exam rooms, where the vet soon joined me. Dr. Simmons was a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a steady voice, the type of person who seemed to carry gravity in everything he said. He sat across from me, folding his hands on the counter. "I'm guessing this is about Max's report," he said softly. My eyes stung at the sound of Max's name, but I nodded and slid the papers out of my bag. "I don't think this was an accident," I whispered. "Someone in my house, someone might have given this to him on purpose." He studied me for a long moment, his brow furrowing. "Emily, I can't accuse anyone without proof, but what the report shows is clear. This wasn't natural. Someone gave Max rat poison. That's not something dogs accidentally ingest unless it's accessible in the home." I swallowed hard, the weight of his words sinking into my chest. He didn't say Claire's name, he didn't have to, but the implication was there. If you truly believe someone harmed Max intentionally, you need to tell your father, or another trusted adult. This isn't something you should shoulder by yourself. His words confirmed what I had known deep down. This was bigger than me, bigger than my grief, bigger than Claire's games. I left the clinic with the report clutched to my chest, feeling as though I was carrying both evidence and a curse. For the first time, I realized that the truth wasn't just about Max anymore. It was about safety. If Claire could do this to him, What was stopping her from doing worse to me if she felt threatened? At home that evening, I tried to act normal, though my nerves buzzed like live wires. Dad was on the couch, flipping through channels, while Claire scrolled through her phone. I thought of Dr. Simmons' advice, the weight of his steady voice telling me to bring an adult into this. I sat down across from Dad, my heart hammering. "Can we talk?" I asked, my voice trembling. He muted the TV and looked at me with concern. "Of course, Em. What's on your mind?" For a moment, the words caught in my throat, but then I remembered Max, remembered his limp body in my arms, and the words tumbled out. The vet did an autopsy. Max didn't die of natural causes. He was poisoned. The silence that followed was deafening. Dad blinked, processing, his jaw tightening. Claire froze mid-scroll, her phone lowering ever so slightly. "What?" Dad asked finally, his voice low. "What are you talking about?" I shoved the report into his hands, the papers trembling as he unfolded them. He scanned the lines, his brows knitting together. This says rat poison?" he murmured, disbelief coloring his tone. I glanced at Claire, whose expression shifted rapidly. Shock, confusion, then carefully measured concern. She placed a hand on Dad's arm, her voice dripping with sorrow. "Oh my goodness! Poisoned? But how? We don't keep anything like that in the house, do we?" Her performance was flawless, each word calculated, her eyes wide with feigned innocence. But I saw the flicker, just for a second, when her mask slipped, a flash of irritation quickly buried beneath her false worry. I wanted to scream, to point at her and tell Dad everything I had seen, every moment of disdain she had shown Max, but I forced myself to stay calm. Evidence was on my side now. "Dad," I said firmly, my voice steadier than I felt, "this wasn't an accident. Someone gave it to him. Someone who wanted him gone." Dad looked torn, his eyes darting between the report and Claire. "This doesn't make sense," he muttered. "Who would do something like that?" Claire squeezed his arm, her voice honey-sweet. "Maybe a neighbor? You know how some people don't like dogs. Maybe he got into something in the yard." She spoke smoothly, but I knew she was deflecting, pushing the blame anywhere but where it belonged. That moment was the point of no return. Dad didn't dismiss the report, not completely. He couldn't. It was right there in his hands. The seed of doubt had been planted, whether he wanted it or not. Outside eyes, Dr. Simmons, the cold words of the autopsy, had seen the truth. The lies Claire wrapped herself in were starting to fray. Later that night, as I lay in bed, I knew there was no going back. I had brought the truth into the open, even if Dad wasn't ready to accept it fully. Claire knew now that I wasn't blind, that I wouldn't stay silent, and I could feel it in my bones. She wouldn't take that lightly. Something in the air had shifted, like a storm gathering on the horizon. Max's death was no longer a shadow whispered about in my head. It was evidence, undeniable and real. And now, the walls of lies Claire built around herself were beginning to crack. I knew that if I wanted the truth to come out, I couldn't stop with the report. Claire had spent years building her facade of perfection, and one document wasn't going to bring it down, not with Dad so eager to keep the peace. I needed more. I needed evidence that couldn't be brushed aside, something undeniable even for him. And so, without realizing it, I began to treat my own home like an investigation site. It started with the kitchen. Claire ruled that space like a queen with her throne, always controlling what went where, how things were stored, even how food was prepared. I remembered her insistence on preparing Max's meals, on making sure he ate properly. One afternoon, when she was out meeting a friend, I slipped into the kitchen and began opening cabinets. My hands shook as I pulled out jars, boxes, and containers. Everything looked ordinary at first. Flour, sugar, spices, neatly labeled. But as I moved to the lower cabinets, the ones she often shooed me away from, I found a small plastic container tucked behind a stack of dish towels. My heart pounded as I pulled it into the light. The label was faded, but the bold words were clear. Rodenticide. My breath caught. My fingers trembled as I unscrewed the lid just enough to glimpse the bluish pellets inside. There it was, the poison that had taken Max from me.
A wave of nausea washed over me, and for a moment I thought I might drop it. But then, the sound of the garage door opening snapped me out of it. Claire was home. Panic surged through me. I shoved the container back into its hiding place, rearranged the towels as best as I could, and darted upstairs, my pulse racing. That night at dinner, I could barely eat. Every bite felt like a betrayal, every sip of water tainted by the knowledge of what I'd found. Claire chattered about a new yoga class she wanted to try, her laugh tinkling like glass. But her eyes kept flicking to me, measuring, assessing. Did she know I had found it? Did she sense my fear? I couldn't risk confronting her yet, not without proof beyond my word. I needed something concrete, something I could show my dad, something I could put in someone else's hands if it came down to it. The thought terrified me, but it also solidified my resolve. If I didn't act, Max's death would be swept under the rug forever. Over the next few days, I became more deliberate. I carried my phone with me constantly, its camera ready. When Claire wasn't around, I'd sneak into the kitchen or the garage, snapping photos of anything suspicious. I documented the container of rodenticide, zooming in on the label, the contents inside. I even recorded a video of myself pulling it out of the cabinet and then putting it back, whispering the date and time so I'd have a clear record. My hands shook the entire time, but I felt stronger with every click of the shutter. The opposition, however, was rising just as steadily. Claire had always been controlling, but now her scrutiny intensified. She started popping into my room without knocking, pretending she was checking if I needed laundry done or if I had finished my homework. She lingered in the hallways, listening, watching. Once, I caught her going through my backpack while I was in the shower. She looked up when I walked in, smiling sweetly as if she were just straightening it up, but I saw the way her eyes lingered on the pocket where I usually kept Max's report. Dad, meanwhile, seemed caught between two worlds. He didn't press me about what I had said, but he also didn't challenge Claire. One evening, as he and I watched dishes together, he cleared his throat. "Emily, I know you're hurting. I am too. But sometimes we see patterns where there aren't any. Don't let your grief turn into suspicion." His words stung. I wanted to scream at him, to shove the photos in his face, but instead I just nodded, biting my tongue until it bled. He was blinded by love, by Claire's careful mask, and that blindness made me feel more isolated than ever. Jordan became my only ally. I showed her the photos one night at her house, sitting cross-legged on her bedroom floor. Her eyes widened as she scrolled through them. "Em, this is huge. You can't just keep this to yourself. If your dad won't listen, maybe it's time to go bigger. Authorities, maybe." The words sent a chill down my spine. The idea of dragging this into the open, of confronting Claire on that level, terrified me. But Jordan was right. At some point, I'd have to decide how far I was willing to go.
Meanwhile, Claire's behavior grew bolder. One evening, as I came downstairs for a glass of water, I caught her in the kitchen, standing perfectly still in the dim light, staring out the window with a glass of wine in hand. She didn't flinch when I entered. Instead, she turned to me slowly, her lips curving into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You know, Emily," she said softly, "dogs come and go, but family is forever. It's better not to dwell on the past." Her words sent a shiver down my spine, and for the first time I felt she wasn't just hinting, she was warning me. I retreated upstairs, clutching my phone like a weapon. The evidence I was gathering might have been growing, but so was her awareness that I wasn't fooled. We were locked in a silent war, each of us waiting for the other to make the next move, and with every passing day, the stakes grew higher. By then, I understood one thing with chilling clarity. Claire wasn't going to stop. She had already erased Max. Now she wanted to erase my suspicion, my resistance, and if I wasn't careful, she might succeed. The tension inside our house had grown unbearable, and by the time the weekend rolled around, I could barely stand to be in the same room as Claire without my chest tightening. Every interaction felt like a chess match, her words carefully chosen, her movements deliberate, while I scrambled to stay one step ahead. Dad remained caught in the middle, leaning on denial as his shield, but I could see the cracks forming in him too. He wasn't as quick to laugh at her jokes anymore, and sometimes when he thought no one was looking, his eyes held that same uncertainty I felt. Still, denial was easier for him than facing what I knew was true. But everything changed on Saturday evening when undeniable proof fell into my hands and destroyed any illusion that maybe, just maybe, I had been wrong. Claire had announced earlier that day that she was going to make her special lasagna for dinner, a recipe she loved bragging about to her friends. I didn't care much for it, but Dad adored it, so I stayed out of the way while she worked in the kitchen, occasionally hearing her hum to herself or clink pans together. I was in the living room with my homework spread across the coffee table when I heard her phone buzz on the counter. Normally, I wouldn't have cared, but something about the way she immediately rushed from the stove to grab it caught my attention. She glanced over her shoulder, checking if anyone was watching, then tapped quickly on the screen, her expression sharpening into something cold. I stayed still, pretending to read, but my mind was spinning. A few minutes later, when she went upstairs, probably to change before dinner, I slipped into the kitchen. Her phone wasn't there anymore, but I noticed something else that froze me in place. On the far corner of the counter, half hidden beneath a folded dish towel, was that same small container I'd found before, the one with the rodent side. My heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear as I stepped closer. The lid was off this time. Beside it was a small mixing bowl with cheese and herbs. My stomach dropped as realization crashed over me. She had been preparing the lasagna with poison nearby. Whether she intended to use it on us or it was just negligence didn't matter. The intent was there. The danger was real. I fumbled in my pocket for my phone, my hand shaking so badly I almost dropped it. With the camera open, I recorded everything. The container, the pellets inside, the bowl, the counter where she had placed them. I whispered the date, the time, describing what I was seeing, just like I had done before. Then, terrified she might come back any second, I tucked the container back beneath the towel, careful to leave it exactly as I had found it. That night, I barely touched my plate. Dad ate heartily, complimenting Claire on her cooking, while she beamed at him with that same rehearsed glow that always made my skin crawl. My fork lingered over the pasta, pushing the noodles around without taking a single bite. When Claire noticed, her eyes lingered on me for a second too long. "Not hungry, Emily?" she asked sweetly. I forced a smile. "Just tired from studying." She tilted her head, her lips curving into that smile that I hated, as if she knew I was lying, as if she was daring me to keep pretending. For the first time, the thought of going to the authorities didn't seem like a distant, terrifying step. It seemed necessary. But the fear of how Dad would react held me back. Would he believe me, or would he think I was inventing this out of grief and paranoia? He loved Claire too much, maybe, to see her for what she really was. I needed a way to confront him with the evidence without giving him the chance to dismiss it. The next morning, I decided to test something. While Dad was in the garage fixing a leaky pipe, I approached him casually, trying to sound as normal as I could. "Dad," I said, "do you think people can hide who they really are for a long time?" He looked up, wiping his hands on a rag, frowning slightly. "What do you mean?" My throat tightened, but I pressed on. Like, what if someone isn't who we think they are? What if they've done something bad, but they act like everything's fine? He chuckled lightly, clearly trying to ease the tension. "That's a pretty heavy question for a Sunday morning, kiddo. Is this about Claire?" I froze. The way he said her name, softly but knowingly, told me he wasn't as blind as he pretended. He sighed, leaning against the workbench. "I know you're suspicious. I can see it in your face, Emily. But suspicion isn't proof." I bit my lip, my phone heavy in my pocket. Proof. The word echoed in my mind. Proof was exactly what I had. That night, when Claire went out to run errands, I made my move. I sat Dad down in the living room, my phone in my hand. "I need you to watch this," I said, my voice shaking but determined. He looked wary, but when I hit play and the video filled the screen, his expression shifted. His eyes narrowed as he saw the rodenticide, the mixing bowl, the towel hiding the container. I explained everything in a rush. How I'd found it,
how she had been preparing dinner with it right there, and how I hadn't eaten because I was terrified. For a long time, he said nothing. His face was pale, his hands gripping his knees so tightly his knuckles turned white. Finally, he whispered, This doesn't make sense." But the denial in his voice was thinner now, cracking under the weight of what he had seen. He replayed the video 3 times, each time his frown deepening, his jaw tightening. When he finally set the phone down, he looked at me with an expression I had never seen before, a mixture of fear, anger, and betrayal. He said, "Don't tell her you have this. Not yet." His words sent a chill through me, but also a flicker of hope. For the first time, Dad wasn't brushing me off. For the first time, he saw what I saw. And that was when I knew the battle lines had shifted. Claire's mask was beginning to crack, and now I wasn't the only one who saw it. The days following the undeniable proof were suffocating. I could feel the tension thickening in the house, coiling around every room, every step I took. Dad was quieter than usual, but the way he avoided Claire's gaze told me he knew something had shifted. Claire, on the other hand, had grown even more calculating. Her sweet smiles no longer reached her eyes, and the warmth she feigned around Dad had taken on a sharp, almost predatory edge. She seemed to sense the change, the fact that I now had him questioning had her carefully orchestrated image beginning to crumble. And with that knowledge, she became dangerous. I spent hours in my room, replaying the video of the rodenticide over and over, thinking about the next move. Every time I tried to plan, my stomach twisted. Dad wasn't ready to confront Claire fully. He was cautious, paralyzed by love for his wife. That left me carrying the truth, the burden of Max's death, the reality of the poison still lurking somewhere in the house. Every glance I caught of Claire felt like she was probing me, testing how far I would go, whether I was weak enough to abandon my suspicion. I wasn't. But I also knew that moving too soon without support could make things catastrophic. Then, one evening, the breaking moment came. I was in the kitchen, pretending to grab a glass of water when Claire rearranged the spice rack. She was unusually quiet, humming softly, when she looked at me with those sharp, calculating eyes and said, "Emily, I know you're upset about Max, but I can't have this tension in the house. You need to let go of the past." Her tone was calm, deceptively gentle, but every fiber of my body screamed at me to run. There was an unmistakable undertone, a subtle warning that she was testing boundaries, seeing if fear would make me bend. I froze, gripping the counter, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need you to leave me alone," I said quietly, my words trembling with emotion but carrying a firm edge. "I'm not upset. I just want answers. I want the truth." Claire's expression flickered, a shadow crossing her face before she masked it with a tight smile. "The truth?" she asked, lightly. "Oh, Emily, sometimes the truth is too heavy for little girls to carry. Don't you think it's better to leave it alone?" She stepped closer, her presence imposing, and my stomach sank. I realized she wasn't just deflecting anymore. She was testing me, sizing me up, seeing if she could intimidate me into silence. At that moment, I knew something critical. If I stayed silent, I would be complicit. Max's death would be just another tragic story, buried under lies and careful manipulation. Claire had power in this house, but that power depended on my silence and Dad's reluctance to confront her. I could no longer remain quiet. The choice was mine: protect myself by keeping the truth hidden, or risk everything to speak it, to demand accountability. The very next morning, I found Dad in the garage fixing a leaky pipe, his hands smeared with grease. He looked up as I approached, sensing my intent before I even spoke. "Dad,
I need to tell you something, I said, my voice steady despite the fear gnawing at my insides. He nodded, setting down the wrench, wiping his hands with a rag. Go ahead, Emily. I told him everything, not holding back. The video, the rodenticide container, the way Claire had prepared food in its presence, the pattern of disdain and subtle cruelty I had witnessed for months. My voice quivered only once when I described finding Max struggling on the living room floor, his eyes full of confusion and trust, the very trust that had been betrayed. Dad's face changed with each word, his expression darkening, his lips pressed into a thin line. When I finished, he was silent for what felt like an eternity. Then he spoke, his voice low and controlled. Emily, this is serious. The tremor in his tone betrayed the turmoil beneath. I didn't want to believe it, but this is real. He exhaled sharply, running a hand over his face. We need to handle this carefully. You've done the right thing by coming to me first. Hearing him acknowledge the truth, even partially, gave me a surge of courage, but it was tempered by the reality that Claire's reaction would be swift and calculating. And I didn't have to wait long to see just how far she would go. That evening, she cornered me in the living room as I tried to study. Emily, she said, her tone sweet but edged with something cold. I hear you've been spreading rumors about me. That's not nice. You should be careful about what you say. She smiled, her lips tight, and I saw it then, her mask slipping, just slightly. She knew. She had seen the fear in Dad's eyes, and now she was testing me, trying to see if I could be broken. But I wasn't broken. I met her gaze directly, my hands clenched in my lap. I'm not afraid of you, I said quietly, and I'm not stopping. The look in her eyes flickered with anger, then calculation, then quickly vanished beneath the veneer of calm. She tilted her head as if to study me, then walked away, humming lightly again. But I knew the battle lines had been drawn. That night, lying in bed, I understood the magnitude of what I had done. I had spoken the truth to my father. I had begun gathering undeniable proof. And Claire had sensed it. Nothing could go back to the way it was. By choosing to speak, I had set in motion a chain of events that would ripple through the family, testing loyalties and courage in ways I could not yet predict. The safety I had once felt was gone, replaced by the awareness that exposing the truth would bring confrontation, escalation, and risk. Yet beneath the fear, there was a quiet, unshakable resolve. Max's death had ignited something in me, a refusal to let lies stand unchallenged. I had chosen to speak, and even if it cost me everything, Dad's denial, Claire's wrath, the fragile peace of home, I could not turn back. The truth was no longer mine alone. It had to be told, no matter the consequences. Claire's first direct confrontation came without warning, a sudden and chilling escalation that left me breathless and acutely aware of how dangerous our household had become. I had returned from school that afternoon, backpack slung over one shoulder, only to find her standing in the foyer, arms crossed, a tight smile plastered across her face that didn't reach her eyes. The air in the room seemed to thicken, each breath I took feeling heavier, as if the walls themselves were closing in. Her presence carried the weight of menace disguised as civility, and I knew immediately that this wasn't a casual conversation. "Emily," she began, her tone deceptively soft, "I hear you've been asking questions, snooping around. That's not nice, is it?" She stepped closer, the scent of her perfume sharp in my nostrils and my stomach twisted. I wanted to retreat, to put distance between us, but I stood my ground, gripping my backpack strap like a lifeline. "I'm not snooping,"
I said carefully, my voice steadier than I felt. I'm trying to understand what happened to Max.
Her smile widened, though it was more predator than friend. Max, she repeated, her voice dripping with mock sadness. Such a sweet boy. It's a shame he's gone, isn't it? So tragic. I can't imagine anyone hurting him, Emily. Do you think someone would really do that in our home? She paused, tilting her head, letting the words sink in. The underlying threat was unmistakable. She was daring me to accuse her, testing the limits of my courage, and I felt a surge of panic, knowing that if I stumbled, if I showed even a flicker of fear, it could be used against me. But I didn't stumble. I had rehearsed this moment over and over in my mind, knowing it would come, though never expecting the cold precision with which she would deliver it. I have proof, I said, my voice firm, producing my phone and opening the video I had recorded in the kitchen. Her eyes flicked to the screen, narrowing just slightly. You have nothing, she countered immediately, stepping closer, her words sharp now, edges cutting into the fragile calm of the house. That's not proof. That's nonsense. You're imagining things. I felt a chill run through me as she leaned in, her eyes piercing, her presence overwhelming. But I held the phone steady, showing her the container, the rodenticide pellets, the mixing bowl she had carelessly left in the kitchen. Her gaze flitted over the screen, and for the briefest moment, her mask faltered. Her lips twitched, her jaw tightened, but then she exhaled slowly and leaned back as if to dismiss the evidence entirely. Emily, this is absurd. You're trying to start drama where there is none. Your father loves me, and I've done nothing wrong. Why can't you just move on? The veiled threat hung in the air. Claire didn't need to raise her voice or touch me to make me understand the danger. Her calm, measured intimidation carried far more weight than any shout could. Every instinct in my body screamed that she was capable of far more than I could have imagined, and that my persistence had put me in her crosshairs. I realized then that this confrontation was only the beginning. The stakes had escalated. She would not back down, and neither could I. That evening, as Dad tried to steer the conversation back to normalcy, I noticed the subtle tension between him and Claire. He was quieter, more cautious, and I could see the shadow of worry crossing his features when she spoke. She was manipulating the narrative, using her charm and calm authority to paint me as irrational, a grieving child, overreacting. I understood that if I wanted the truth to prevail, I needed to strengthen my position. I couldn't rely on Dad alone, nor could I allow Claire to corner me into silence. The following days became a delicate balancing act. Claire's attempts to intimidate me escalated in small, almost imperceptible ways. She would hover just outside my room door, clearing her throat loudly when I was on the phone, or accidentally bump into me in the hallway, a subtle reminder that she was always present, always watching. I caught her going through my school bag once, pretending she was looking for a pen, but her eyes lingered on the small folder where I kept copies of the report and my photos. It was psychological warfare, a test of endurance, and I was determined not to give her the satisfaction of fear. Meanwhile, I doubled down on gathering evidence. Every opportunity to photograph, record, or document her movements became crucial. I learned to move silently, to watch without being seen, to capture the minutiae that could ultimately expose her for the manipulative, dangerous person she truly was. I even began discreetly documenting our interactions in a journal, noting the times she made veiled threats, the ways she tried to control Dad, and the subtle intimidation tactics she employed. Each entry strengthened my resolve, a quiet testament to the growing reality that I was no longer a passive observer. I was preparing for a confrontation that would inevitably reach beyond the walls of our home. The tipping point came one night when I returned from Jordan's house and found Claire waiting in the living room, seated like a queen, wine glass in hand. Her posture deliberate, calculated. "Emily," she said smoothly, "you've been very busy lately. Collecting things, watching me, taking notes. What are you planning?" Her voice carried no emotion, just cold calculation. My hands shook, but I held my ground.
I'm planning to make sure the truth comes out and that Max didn't die in vain. Her eyes darkened, but her face remained calm. Be careful, Emily, she said softly, almost whispering, because sometimes the truth can be dangerous, especially when it's wielded by someone who doesn't understand its consequences. I swallowed hard, recognizing the threat beneath her words. And yet, for the first time, I felt an unshakable clarity. I couldn't turn back now. The confrontation had escalated to a point where inaction was no longer an option, and every piece of evidence I had gathered made me stronger.
By the end of that night, I understood the cold reality of our battle. Claire had revealed her hand, and the game was no longer psychological alone. It was a direct confrontation. She had sensed the shift, and she was fighting to maintain control. But so was I, and the tension between us had reached its peak. The fight for truth and justice had become inevitable, and I knew the next steps would push both of us to our limits. By the time the weekend rolled around, the house felt suffocating, as though the walls themselves were closing in, pressing me from every side. Claire had escalated her intimidation tactics, and I could feel the tension radiating off every surface. Her presence had become oppressive, a constant shadow that tailed me wherever I went. She lingered in doorways, hovered just outside my bedroom, and smiled in ways that felt more like threats than warmth. I could see her plotting, calculating, and I felt a growing fear that I hadn't anticipated, a fear that even with the proof I had, I might not be safe. Dad, meanwhile, seemed to be retreating further into denial. Despite having watched the video and seen the evidence with his own eyes, he still hesitated to confront Claire directly. His avoidance created a suffocating silence between us, a quiet that screamed louder than any words. He tried to act as if life were normal, but his distracted glances and furrowed brow betrayed him. I could tell he was afraid of rocking the boat, afraid of the consequences of acknowledging the truth. That left me isolated, standing on the edge of something I didn't yet have the power to control. That night, after dinner, Claire cornered me in the kitchen. She leaned against the counter, one eyebrow raised, her eyes fixed on me with a predatory focus. "You know, Emily, I've been thinking about Max. So sad. Such a little dog. And yet you seem so obsessed with the past. You need to be careful about letting your imagination run wild. Some things are better left alone." Her words were coded in sweetness, but the underlying message was clear. She was testing my limits, trying to see if fear could make me stop. I swallowed hard, my stomach twisting. I knew she wasn't bluffing. Her calm, controlled demeanor carried a threat I could feel in my bones. I wanted to scream, to tell Dad everything, to expose her completely, but I couldn't. He was still caught in the liminal space between belief and denial. Speaking out too loudly would isolate me further, possibly putting me in even greater danger. I felt trapped in a house where the truth itself was dangerous, and I began to doubt whether I had the strength to carry on. The nights became longer, filled with restless tossing and turning. I replayed every moment, every conversation, every subtle glance, analyzing Claire's behavior for signs of what she might do next. Each analysis brought new anxiety. I wondered if she had been the one to leave Rodentside in reach intentionally, not just for Max, but for potentially for any future disruption. Could she have harmed someone else? Was I next? I questioned every step I took, every decision, every word I had spoken. The weight of the truth pressed down on me, making me feel both powerless and hyper-aware. School offered no respite. Every hallway, every glance from peers felt amplified by the fear gnawing at me. I had shared bits of the situation with Jordan, but even confiding in her only made the danger feel more real. The more I documented, the more I became aware of how carefully Claire could manipulate perception. She had been perfect at maintaining appearances, and now that the cracks were forming, she had intensified her scrutiny of me, ensuring that no misstep could go unnoticed.
Even friends at school seemed like potential messengers of gossip, unintentional threats who might reveal my secrets before I was ready. One evening, after another tense dinner, I retreated to my room and collapsed on my bed, phone and journal clutched to my chest. I felt utterly alone, isolated not just physically, but emotionally. Dad's silence, Claire's intimidation, the house's suffocating atmosphere, they all combined to make me feel powerless. The evidence I had collected, once a source of strength, now felt like a burden. It was proof of Max's death and of Claire's deceit, but it also exposed me to confrontation, ridicule, and danger. I questioned whether I had the courage to see this through, whether the truth was worth the risk of losing the fragile bonds I still had with my father.
Sleep came fitfully, haunted by dreams of Max, of Claire watching me with cold calculation, of Dad turning away in disbelief. I woke in the night, drenched in sweat, heart pounding, feeling as if the walls were closing in once again. The house that had once been my safe space now felt like a cage. And I realized that the darkness surrounding this situation wasn't just external, it was also inside me. Fear, doubt, and grief had taken root, and I struggled to see a path forward. Yet beneath the despair, a quiet ember remained. I remembered Max's loyalty, the way he had trusted me unconditionally, and I realized that my hesitation, my fear, would dishonor him. I couldn't let it end like this, with the truth buried beneath Claire's calculated lies and Dad's denial. I had already come this far, and to give up now would be to let Max's death be meaningless. The path ahead was dangerous, and the consequences of speaking up were terrifying, but I understood something fundamental. Courage was not the absence of fear, it was moving forward despite it. By the following morning, I made a decision. I would speak. I would confront the lies, face Claire's intimidation, and push my father to see the truth. The risk was high, the backlash inevitable. But in that moment, the ember of resolve ignited into something stronger. I knew the confrontation ahead would test me to my limits, but I could no longer hide, no longer doubt. The darkness had come, and I had survived it. But the final battle was yet to begin. By the following weekend, the tension in the house had reached a peak pitch. Dad had finally agreed to watch the videos with me again, this time sitting fully attentive in the living room as I laid out all the evidence I had collected, photos, videos, and the autopsy report. He shuffled nervously in his chair, glancing at Claire occasionally, who had taken her usual spot across from him, feigning calm. But the moment my phone illuminated with the video of the rodenticide, Claire's perfectly rehearsed mask began to quiver. I saw the faintest flicker of panic in her eyes, the first crack in her otherwise impenetrable facade, and I realized that the truth was finally within reach, if we played it right. "Look at this, Dad," I said, my voice steady despite the fluttering of my chest. "This isn't a mistake. Max didn't die naturally. She put poison in the kitchen while making food. It was deliberate." My words carried weight this time, not just because of my conviction, but because of the undeniable evidence in front of us. I watched Dad's eyes widen as he leaned forward, scrutinizing every detail on the screen. He exhaled slowly, the color draining from his face. "Emily, this can't be real," he muttered, but I saw that his disbelief was weakening, giving way to a dawning horror. Claire, sensing the shift in power, straightened immediately, her hands clasped on her lap. "Now, Emily," she said, her tone light and deceptively maternal, "I think you're misunderstanding things. I've done nothing wrong. I've cared for this family, and now you're making wild accusations." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes, and I knew she was banking on Dad's affection for her to carry the moment. I felt the tension building in the room, a quiet battle of wills where every glance and word was a weapon. I had rehearsed this moment countless times in my head, knowing that I had to remain calm and precise. "It's not a misunderstanding," I said firmly, setting the phone down and looking at Dad directly.
I have the autopsy report. Pictures, videos, everything points to poison. This wasn't an accident, and we can't ignore it. Max trusted us, and she betrayed that trust. Dad rubbed his temples, his expression torn between disbelief and the undeniable reality of the evidence. Claire's smile faltered, and I saw the first sign of real fear in her eyes. "Emily," she said, her voice rising slightly now, tinged with irritation, "you're trying to turn my husband against me. That's cruel. You're being manipulative and dishonest. This is a family, and you're destroying it with lies." She stood, pacing slowly, her movements deliberate, trying to assert control over the situation. But the videos were there, the photos were there, the report was there, and for the first time, Claire couldn't sweep them aside with charm alone. Her carefully constructed narrative was crumbling in front of Dad, and I could see him struggling to reconcile the woman he loved with the undeniable reality of her actions. The room felt charged, every second stretching longer, heavier. I took a deep breath and continued, my voice gaining strength. "It's not about destroying anyone, Dad. It's about justice for Max and for anyone else who might be at risk. We have proof, and we can't let it be ignored. We need to do the right thing." My words hung in the air like a challenge, and for the first time, I saw Dad's resolve hardening. He set his jaw, finally meeting Claire's gaze with a clarity I had never seen before.
Claire, sensing the momentum slipping from her grasp, lashed out. "You're both being ridiculous. Emily, you've been obsessed with the dog's death for weeks, and now you're trying to accuse me of something monstrous. Dad, don't listen to this nonsense." Her voice grew louder, more frantic, but the evidence refused to be denied. Dad's eyes, once clouded by denial, now reflected comprehension. The hesitation, the worry, the need to protect Claire. Everything began to dissolve under the weight of truth. Finally, Dad's voice broke through, steady and unwavering. "Claire, enough. I can't ignore this anymore. This is serious. I've seen the evidence and I won't pretend it doesn't exist. We need answers. We need to take the next step." Claire froze, her mouth opening slightly as if searching for a response, but no words came. The calm, collected facade that had protected her for months was gone, replaced by raw panic and disbelief. At that moment, I felt a surge of vindication, a rush of relief I had not allowed myself to feel until now. The confrontation was over, the evidence laid bare, and for the first time, Dad had taken a clear stance. We were no longer facing a subtle, insidious manipulation. The truth had been placed on trial, and the outcome was undeniable. Max's death, once whispered about in private grief, had become a catalyst for exposure and accountability. Claire's next moves were desperate. She tried to rationalize, to charm, to redirect blame, but Dad's focus never wavered. He called the authorities to discuss the findings, arranging for them to verify the evidence and ensure accountability. I stayed by his side, heart pounding, witnessing the culmination of weeks of fear, research, and quiet courage. The house, once oppressive and suffocating, felt lighter. The tension lingered, but it was tempered now by the knowledge that truth had been spoken, witnessed, and validated. As the officers arrived and began asking questions, taking photos, reviewing evidence, I realized that the climax had been reached. Not just the confrontation itself, but the undeniable exposure of deception, manipulation, and betrayal. Max's death, once whispered about in private grief, had become a catalyst for exposure and accountability. Claire's next moves were desperate. She tried to rationalize, to charm, to redirect blame, but Dad's focus never wavered. He called the authorities to discuss the findings, arranging for them to verify the evidence and ensure accountability. I stayed by his side, heart pounding, witnessing the culmination of weeks of fear, research, and quiet courage. The house, once oppressive and suffocating, felt lighter. The tension lingered, but it was tempered now by the knowledge that truth had been spoken, witnessed, and validated.
As the officers arrived and began asking questions, taking photos, reviewing evidence, I realized that the climax had been reached. Not just the confrontation itself, but the undeniable exposure of deception, manipulation, and betrayal. Claire's reign of fear, which had gripped our household for months, was being dismantled piece by piece. She could no longer rely on charm or coercion. The truth, once hidden in shadows, was now in the light, scrutinized and undeniable. Sitting in the living room, watching the process unfold, I felt a sense of empowerment I had never known before. Every tremor of fear, every sleepless night, every hidden camera and whispered conversation had led to this moment. Max's death had sparked a chain reaction that would change everything. And even as Claire's protests grew more frantic, I knew the battle was over. The truth had prevailed, finally, and the final push had been made. The days following Claire's exposure were a strange mixture of relief, tension, and rebuilding. Dad had taken immediate steps to ensure that justice was served, contacting the authorities and cooperating fully with the investigation. Claire, once the unchallenged presence in our home, now moved through the house like a shadow of herself, her once commanding voice reduced to hurried whispers and angry mutterings behind closed doors. The contrast was stark, almost surreal. Where she radiated control and manipulation, now she radiated fear, her carefully crafted facade crumbling under scrutiny and accountability. For the first time in months, I could breathe. The oppressive weight that had made even the simplest actions, walking through the hall, sitting in the living room, even sleeping at night, feel like a battle had lifted. Dad and I spent hours talking, sometimes sitting in silence, simply processing everything that had happened. He apologized quietly for his hesitation and denial, acknowledging that his love for Claire had blinded him, at least temporarily, to the truth. "I should have seen it sooner," he said one evening, his voice thick with remorse. "But I'm proud of you for standing firm. You had the courage I wish I had sooner." His words were a balm, and I felt the layers of tension in our relationship begin to peel away, replaced by mutual understanding and strengthened trust. Claire's downfall was methodical. The authorities verified the evidence I had gathered, the videos, photographs, and autopsy report, and confirmed that the rodenticide had been deliberately placed. Though her intentions beyond Max's death could not be definitively proven, the negligence and risk she had posed were undeniable. Legal measures were taken to ensure she could not manipulate or intimidate further, and Dad began the process of separating her from the household. The emotional weight of seeing Claire removed was immense. I had spent so long under her shadow that the silence she left behind felt almost alien. But with that silence came relief. And with relief came clarity. In the aftermath, Dad and I worked together to rebuild our home, both literally and emotionally. We repainted rooms, reorganized spaces that had once been under Claire's strict control, and gradually reclaimed areas that felt unsafe. Every small act, pulling the rodenticide container out permanently, clearing out cupboards, reorganizing the kitchen, was symbolic. A declaration that we were reclaiming our environment and asserting that the truth, not deception, would define our home. Each task strengthened my sense of agency, reminding me that courage was not just about confronting lies, but about creating a safe space for oneself in their aftermath.
Jordan remained my anchor through this period. We spent countless afternoons talking, revisiting every detail of the ordeal, laughing at small memories, crying when the weight of loss resurfaced. Her support reminded me that, even in the darkest moments, connection and trust could anchor a person. Together, we started a small memorial for Max in the backyard, a simple wooden plaque near the spot where he used to lie in the sun. Planting flowers around it, watering them, and speaking his name aloud became a ritual of remembrance, a way to honor his life while affirming the victory of truth over silence and deceit. Dad, too, began to open up in ways he hadn't before. He shared stories of his own vulnerabilities, of mistakes he had made in his life, and of the lessons he had learned from ignoring his intuition and letting fear dictate decisions.
It was a revelation for me, a way to see him not just as a protective parent, but as a human capable of learning, changing, and ultimately standing up for what is right. Our bond deepened, fortified by shared experience and the undeniable knowledge that courage, when coupled with evidence and persistence, could overcome even the most insidious deceit. The community, once unaware of the tension and manipulation that had played out in the shadows, now acknowledged the truth. Friends and neighbors reached out, expressing sympathy and admiration for the courage it took to confront the situation and ensure accountability. The validation extended beyond Dad and me. It reinforced that courage and vigilance could illuminate hidden dangers, and that standing firm against manipulation, even when the people around you struggle to see the truth, was not only necessary, but transformative. By the end of the month, a new equilibrium had taken hold. Claire's presence in the household was eliminated, her power diminished, and the environment we lived in had shifted fundamentally. Fear no longer dictated our movements or conversations. Honesty, transparency, and trust had replaced it. Dad and I laughed again, the sound unguarded, free, and untainted by the weight of threat. The house, once oppressive and tense, now resonated with warmth and safety, each room a testament to the courage it took to reclaim it. Most importantly, I felt empowered. The ordeal had transformed me, teaching lessons about resilience, the necessity of evidence, and the power of speaking truth even when fear and doubt threatened to paralyze. Max's death, tragic as it was, became a catalyst for change and accountability, demonstrating that vigilance, courage, and persistence could overcome manipulation and deceit. It was a hard-earned victory, one that came with scars but also with profound clarity about justice, integrity, and the human capacity to confront darkness and emerge stronger. As I lay in bed each night, I thought of Max, of the months of fear and uncertainty, of the courage it had taken to see the truth through, and I knew that while the ordeal was over, the lessons remained. Vigilance, persistence, and integrity could illuminate the darkest corners, even when others around you are blinded by love, fear, or manipulation. In the quiet moments of reflection, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction, not from vengeance, but from the knowledge that justice had prevailed, that truth had been honored, and that the bonds of trust and love that mattered most had been restored. The morning sunlight spilled into my room in a way that felt almost symbolic, warming the space and filling it with a sense of possibility I hadn't known in months. I sat on the edge of my bed, my journal open beside me, reflecting on everything that had transpired, the months of fear, manipulation, and grief, and the months of painstaking effort to uncover the truth about Max's death. The house was finally quiet, not oppressive or tense, but filled with a calm that spoke of restored order and safety. For the first time in what felt like forever, I allowed myself to breathe fully, to feel the absence of dread in the pit of my stomach. The ordeal had been exhausting, emotionally draining, and terrifying at times, but it had also taught me lessons I knew would shape the rest of my life. Dad entered my room quietly, holding a steaming mug of coffee, his face soft but alert. He set the mug down on my desk and leaned against the doorframe, looking at me with a mixture of pride and gratitude. "Morning, Emily," he said gently. "Sleep well?" I nodded, closing my journal. "I did," I replied, and it was the truth. The fear that had haunted my nights for months had faded, replaced by a quiet confidence and a sense of control. He smiled, his eyes lingering on mine. "You know, I can't say it enough. You were brave. All of this, it's because you didn't back down. You stood firm when it mattered most." I felt a warmth spread through me, a deep reassurance that the courage I had summoned was not only validated, but celebrated.
The home we had reclaimed was still in the process of repair, both physically and emotionally. We spent weekends working together to reorganize the rooms, painting over the places where Claire's presence had dominated, and creating spaces that felt safe, welcoming, and ours. Every brushstroke, every piece of furniture moved or rearranged symbolized a reclaiming of our lives and our autonomy. I found satisfaction in the small tasks, the careful placement of a bookshelf, the neat arrangement of Dad's workshop, even tending to the flowers by Max's memorial plaque. Each act reminded me that life, like a room that has been rearranged and cleaned, could be renewed after darkness and betrayal. I also discovered that my voice could matter outside the walls of our home. In the weeks after Claire's departure and the legal measures taken to ensure accountability, I began writing about the experience, not in a vengeful or accusatory way, but as a guide for others who might face manipulation, deceit, or loss. I detailed how courage, evidence, and persistence could uncover hidden truths, how fear could be confronted, and how vigilance and integrity could restore order to chaotic situations. Friends, neighbors, and even school counselors reached out, expressing gratitude for my honesty and resilience. It was empowering to realize that the lessons Max's death had taught me could help others, turning tragedy into purpose. I continued to visit Max's small memorial daily, sometimes alone, sometimes with Dad or Jordan. We would talk about him, laugh at the memories, and even share moments of silence, honoring the trust and unconditional love he had given us. Those moments became grounding, a way to reflect on how far we had come and the strength it had taken to reach this new equilibrium. The pain of losing Max remained, but it was softened by the knowledge that his death had not been in vain. It had exposed deceit and spurred change, creating a safer environment and teaching me lessons I would carry forever. School resumed with a new perspective for me as well. I approached friendships and interactions with a stronger sense of discernment and confidence. Where I had once doubted myself, hesitant to speak up or challenge injustice, I now felt empowered to trust my instincts, stand by my principles, and advocate for truth and fairness. Teachers noticed a subtle shift in my demeanor, more focused, assertive, and composed. It wasn't arrogance, but a quiet strength that came from surviving an ordeal that tested every aspect of my courage. At home, Dad and I developed a routine that emphasized transparency and mutual support. We began openly discussing concerns, sharing observations, and validating each other's experiences. The tension that had once silenced conversations was replaced with dialogue, collaboration, and trust. Even the smallest gestures, sharing breakfast together, taking walks together, or simply talking in the evenings, took on profound meaning. I realized that rebuilding relationships after trauma required both honesty and patience, but the results were rewarding, offering a sense of stability and emotional security that had been absent for too long. Looking forward, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The events surrounding Max's death had been devastating, but they had also awakened in me a determination to advocate for the vulnerable, to question appearances, and to act courageously when truth demanded it. I began volunteering at the local animal shelter, channeling grief into positive action, and ensuring that other animals and the people who cared for them would have advocates willing to speak up. Each act of service reinforced my understanding that courage and empathy were intertwined, and that even small contributions could create meaningful change. The transformation was profound. From the frightened, anxious girl who had tiptoed around Claire's intimidation, I had become a young woman capable of standing firm against manipulation, of gathering and presenting evidence, and of confronting injustice directly. Fear no longer dictated my actions. Courage, clarity, and purpose guided me. Max's life, brief though it had become a catalyst for this transformation, shaping my understanding of trust, integrity, and the responsibility that comes with knowing the truth. Sitting by the window that morning, sunlight bathing the room in gold, I allowed myself a moment of reflection and gratitude. I had survived, learned, and grown. The house felt alive, safe in ours. Dad's presence was steady and supportive. Jordan and friends continued to offer unwavering encouragement. And in my heart, Max's memory remained, a quiet but powerful reminder of why courage mattered, why truth mattered, and why standing up, even in the face of fear, could transform a life. The ordeal was behind me, but the lessons would last forever, shaping the person I had become and guiding the path ahead.